So today we're discussing one of the most interesting and fascinating ambitious experiment in community building that emerged from the crypto and blockchain space, which is Zuzalu. And so in 2023, Vitalik Buterin, who was the founder of Ethereum, gathered 200 people in Montenegro in order to live for 2 months together and to work together and to experiment together. And the goal was to explore what happens when you bring people together for long enough in order to actually be able to build culture and not just exchange ideas. And now, 3 years after this experiment, we've seen an explosion of similar projects from Edge City to Vitalia to Shanghai Wu, the Network School, and many more. And those are like pop up villages, intentional communities, or experimental zones, which are each testing and experimenting with different modes of living in order to explore how people can live, govern themselves, and potentially organize into specific actions outside of the traditional state structures. But also, we've witnessed that many of those experiments are getting shorter, smaller, or perhaps more generic over time, essentially somehow drifting back to being just like a long and large conference. And so, what distinguishes those projects which actually create community and culture from those projects that don't? And what will it take to actually produce something that is enduring over time and that actually produce real political communities which can engage in collective action? And to discuss those ideas, we are joined today by Vitalik Buterin, who has spent the past 3 years and many more thinking and also actively participating in the space, visiting projects from Prospera in Honduras to the GMC in Bhutan, and also who has been writing a lot on this topic. And together, we want to explore what is working and what's not working. What can we learn from those successful or failed experiments so that we can gather new insights on how to actually build network nations, which are not just temporary community and which are not just a gathering of people, but actually that can become lasting political actors. Okay, so Vitalik, we're really happy to have you with us. The main reason that we're really happy is because you are at the inception of Zuzalu, which I also had the privilege to attend for a few weeks. And Zuzalu was actually the bedding ground in which the whole work around what we call now Network Nation was born. So we have very good anchor point around Zuzalu. And yeah, so to start, what we would like to discuss with you is actually if you can tell us a little bit about the motivation that brought you to instantiate Zuzalu, whether it was like something that you had in mind for a long time, whether it was inspired because of Balaji Network State book, or like what were you trying to achieve and what were the underlying motivation behind that?
Yeah, so at the time, I had been thinking about a lot of similar kinds of topics. So, and I did read Balaji's book and wrote that long review of it back in 2022. But also before that, in 2021, I wrote that post on crypto cities, and I'd been thinking about like how crypto could potentially improve urban economics. I've been following the charter cities people, even before crypto, following some of these different movements that were, like trying to figure out like what it means to create new communities or or new societies or new tribes. And it felt like at that moment, at the end of 2022, there were a lot of people who like wrote a lot of things and a lot of really interesting discussion, but it felt like it was the right time to try to like move things from just talking about things to like much more action. And like, and so my thinking was like, let's just do a real life experiment, and let's do something that like really pushes in directions that haven't really been done before, right? So the idea was you bring 200 people together from a few different communities, right? So included the Ethereum community, included the longevity community, some rationalists, people who are thinking about AI, people who are thinking about like governance, and 200 people together in one place for 2 months. And basically, let's like try to create a temporary city and see what happens. And my thinking had been that, like, there have already been a lot of things that were like much smaller than that, right? Like hacker houses have existed since forever. Conferences have existed since forever. Even like very large scale things like Burning Man existed for a long time. And combining together like both that kind of diversity, like having those few different communities together with the with both having that longer duration and that larger scale was one of those things that I really wanted to like make sure we actually do and not don't compromise on, right? Because part of my thinking had been that like the goal is to try to get as close as possible to what one of these like new cities or new societies would look like if you tried to actually do it, but in in a way that's like still feasible, right? And if you do anything smaller, then like my thinking was that there would just be too many dynamics that you would miss, right? Like in the 200-person group, we saw people forming their own different sub tribes. Like there were people doing Ethereum related workshops, and then there were people doing like exercise and things like cold plunges and running and saunas. There were also people, like doing hot pots and karaoke. There were people like doing just all kinds of different things. And like with the 2 month duration, it really got people past the point where they were thinking of the experience as like a break from their life, and got to the point where people they were thinking about it as like this for these 2 months. This actually is my life. And so, yeah, I was basically trying to figure out like what is that step, right? That's much more ambitious than what's already been done many times so that we would actually learn some interesting new things, and then at the same time something that we could still just like do and pull off within half a year. And so yeah, I decided to like try to do this alone.
And one thing that I think was very specific and novel about Zuzalu was the membership approach to it, which is like, people need to obtain a visa.
Mm,
And that means, of course, that it's not just I buy a ticket. It means that I need to apply and then be
mhm,
accepted. And so
mm,
I'm quite curious about like that particular selection process. What were you discriminating for or against? Like, were you trying, like, to which extent were you trying to identify people that are part of a particular common culture? To which extent were you trying to ensure diversity or alignment? Like, what were you trying to achieve through this selection process?
yeah. So the way the process like really worked is we found about like 10 to 20 people, and then we gave each of them the opportunity to suggest people to invite whom we would in most cases just accept. And the goal, I think, definitely, was that we saw a lot of those inviters as being like people who had a good sense of what kind of people would make sense for Zuzalo like, within their own community, right? So some of them came from the Ethereum community and then like different corners of the Ethereum community. Some of them came from like the longevity space. Some came from like the Vienna rationalist community, some from a few other places. And the goal was definitely to like find and bring people who were part of a few particular cultures and like communities and spaces, but also at the same time, like more than just one. Um, and people who were um, interesting, who would provide like value to the Zuzula while it was happening. Also, we wanted to avoid like the kinds of people who would kind of pop in opportunistically. Yeah. So like basically the kinds of people who would like wants to come in because they're like trying to shoulder projects or like trying to
Mhm.
identify like things to invest in and so on. Yeah, like we were very worried at the beginning, right? That's like this sort of thing would end up being pretty high profile, and then it's like how as happens in the internet. You have your geeks, and then you have your mops and your sociopaths, and like we were trying to be selective.
I think one of the interesting elements, I mean, I wasn't able to join Zuzalu at the time, unfortunately, but I've heard, of course, many stories about it. And what strikes me always is that it was kind of this Schelling point of a lot of people who were already part of network communities. And it brought kind of to the surface the potential of what network community building could be in the 21st century. But in many ways, it is still kind of an emerging vision, right? There were a lot of offspring, so it was usually inspiration for a lot of people. There for all these offsprings like Edge City and so on, which try to incubate like a similar setup to Zuzalu. But a lot of them are still in the process of trying to understand what it is that they're actually trying to construct in many ways. So I was just wondering, where do you see this currently going directionally?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, part of the goal then, right, was to like try to give all of us more information about what is the next direction that it actually makes sense, right? Because like even at the time, it was obvious that there were a lot of these different visions where the first or second step might like all align, because the first and second step is just like building the community and like going from an online thing to something in person. But then if you look at the like the fifth or the 10th step of like what like Primavera wants to do versus what Balaji wants to do versus like even what like Mark Lutter from I don't know, Charter Cities Institute wants to do versus even like what the longevity people wants to do. Like there's very different longer term goals, and I mean part of the my interest was definitely in like trying to create more knowledge and like discover like what next steps actually make sense. And I think that that was one of those things that like Zuzula the event actually ended up not doing too much of, right? Like I think it still left like what is the next step as this kind of big open question. And then at the end of 2023, right? So half a year after, I made the decision to decentralize Zorzalo in the sense that like we would not try to make like one central community. We would try to make like basically encourage people to do all of their own thing. And we saw Edge City come out of that. We saw Shanghai Wu come out of that. We saw Forces come out of that. We saw Vitalia, which then Infinita and all Viva City and all of those projects come out of it. And the goal is basically to see, well, like, like let's see how some of these projects diverge and like try to cooperate where we can. And I think we cooperated on some like digital public goods, like some of digital infrastructure quite a bit. Also cooperated on like just getting everyone together to do their pop-ups beside each other in Chiang Mai 1.5 years later. I guess I saw those next couple of years as that sort of process of discovery. And I think my recent like change of mindset since then has like the biggest part has been that like I do believe in permanent locations more.
Mm.
And I think like the main reason why I believe in permanent locations more, right, is that to me the whole point of doing these things instead of like people just chilling is that you're able to like instantiate a lot of things, whether it's cultures, whether it's governance mechanisms with a lot more depth, right? And if you want that depth, then you need that. Like I think you need permanence, right? I think this was pretty obvious to me when I saw like how Shanghai Wu was doing it, right? Because like
Mhm.
I'm very impressed by their commitments to like the cultural aspects of what they do, but then and like they do a lot of beautiful things, but then when you come and you visit, I mean, it's just obvious that like the decorations, for example, are just paper, right? And of course, just paper is the only thing that you can possibly do when you have something that lasts for 40 days, right? And so this is part of why, yeah, like I think, we need to create things that last like at least much longer than 40 days. And yeah, so that's starting to happen now.
I think this actually relates to the distinction that you make in your recent post, which is I think there's a distinction between like a city and the tribe or the what we call the nation, which is clearly a city. An ephemeral city will never be able to be as advanced and sophisticated as a permanent city. But I think the interesting question is when we talk about the tribes or the nation,
Mm,
um, are they bound to the same constraints? Meaning that can we actually create a nation or create a tribe that has this nationness feature in a digitally like permanent at the digital level with some instantiation at the physical level, or
mm,
is it also something that require this constant and permanent physicality? And I think the
mm,
Zuzalu experiment, in my view, was quite interesting at the cultural level because I think it started by gathering communities that through the internet had identified themselves as having similar values and somehow a similar approximate culture. But then by bringing them physically together, even if just for 2 months, this initial cultural affinity has actually been increasingly built and then new culture emerged, like a new cultural level, which is the Zuzalu culture, if you want to call it like that, which has strengthened this affinity to a point in which it has actually pivoted to the degree of kinship that perhaps was not there when there was just a cultural affinity that was digitally bound. So to my view, like Zuzalu, like and all those pop-up cities, what's powerful is not necessarily the pop-up city aspect and the city aspect of the pop-up city, but it's the possibility for digitally aligned, culturally aligned communities to actually build culture through geographical proximity, which they cannot for things that they cannot do. Like you cannot do the cold plunge digitally, but that's obviously also part of a culture, right? So do you feel like what you just said about like the cities that you're convinced that it needs to be a permanent thing, does it also apply for the tribe slash nationness aspect of things?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, how much permanence do you need? Like, I think the one thing that I am confident in is that like we don't want everyone in this space to be like jumping between locations every 40 days. Like, I think like there's always a spectrum here, right? And like I think at that level is a bit too much. And like generally, like when you like jump between locations, there's a cost, and like and then always some people are able to come, other people are not able to come, and then you have to like just like pay the economic costs of like figuring the new venue out. One thing actually on physical venues that I think like we've only come to appreciate over time is that like there is like there's sort of generic physical venues, then you can think of the idea of like what would a physical venue that's like totally designed around a particular tribe be like? And then there's like this interesting point in the middle, which is well, what about physical venues that are sort of designed more for tribes without designing for a super specific one, right? And like there's a lot of things that need to be different, right? So like for example, the really big one is just having spaces where you can do collective events, right? Like basically, yeah, a room that has like 100 to 200 chairs and a big screen, right? It's like effectively the thing that is a movie theater and the conference room, which is really the same thing. And like that's something that's surprisingly hard to find in a lot of places, right? But then and like we often work hard to make it happen, right? Like in the original Zuzu, like we basically just built an entire dome from scratch, and like lots of people use the dome, and it was really this super important, like cultural and like strong points, right? And like both like Ethereum specific stuff and like the music and dance and like all of those activities happen there. And I mean, one of the things that we've also been seeing, right, is that like you have 4Cs, which is a permanent node in Chiang Mai, and then we actually see pop-ups that are happening inside of it, right? And so essentially, yeah, you have something which is sort of a tribe and at the same time, like sort of a city, and then you also have other tribes that it connects to. And like I think this makes total sense, right? So yeah.
I think there's a trade-off, right? Which is obviously it's annoying that people have to travel all over the world in order to instantiate themselves and build culture geographically. At the same time, if we are only location based, then we're also missing out on all the people in the world that could actually be part of the same cultural entity or nation. Because they are not in the same place, right? And so we also want to ensure that there is capacity of discovering and connecting with the people from the other side of the world, which for whatever reason happen to have a culturally aligned um, artifact and potentially therefore could be associated into the same community.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this is like actually one of these big differences, right, between all of these projects and like traditional nations is that like with traditional nations, you're accustomed to membership being like either 0 or 1, right? Like either you're a foreigner or you're full time, and like this is not the model that works for any of these things, right? And like what you actually see is like you see people like there's always some small core that wants to stay full time. There's people who come in, there's people who come in more frequently, there's people who come in less frequently. That's a healthy thing, I think, right? And like different versions of that just work for different people. Um, and yeah, so like there's a lot of value in going around and like seeing and interacting with different communities. Then, on the other hand, like there's people who is just because of their passports, it's difficult to be able to go to like literally every single one of them. And if they're able to figure out how to get into even one country, then it's a blessing. And so like you don't want to sort of over-index on the nomad side of things either. So like I think the right path is being able to support both kinds of groups.
Just like pick on that with the nomadism, because I think like there is some sort of bias, of course, in these communities that it attracts mainly like digital nomads who are tech adjacent, I would say, which is a specific kind of community which tends to have not many like instantiations in specific places because these people travel, and therefore there's a need for gathering spaces around the world. But then there's also another way to think around network societies in a bottom-up way, which kind of tries to build a network infrastructure for place-based communities, which are value aligned. Let's take, for instance, the bioregional movement. You have a lot of like place-based instantiations around the world of people who are actually coordinating around the same goals of like integrating natural and like human systems. They're building culture around this, but they're scattered around the world. And so far they have like not the scaffolding, I would say, to really
Yeah.
coordinate at a global scale. So I wonder, is there also a way to think around these kind of questions of
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, like I feel like this was something that the Bitcoin community was like sort of trying to like inched towards, I remember 5 or 10 years ago, right? Because in Bitcoin community, of course, internet-based, very global community. And then there was this movement of trying to create these like Bitcoin embassies, right? Like there was, one in Toronto, there was one in Vienna, there was like some everywhere. And there were this like community of people who were kind of excited about this concept. And like for them, when they go to different places around the world as tourists, like one of the things that they would do is they would go to the local Bitcoin embassy, right? And the idea is basically like you see something that still is recognizably your culture in the sense of, if you're a Bitcoiner, then you know they're gonna know who Hal Finney is. They're gonna be able to talk about the 93 billion Bitcoin bug from 2010. They're gonna be able to tell you a lot of unfavorable facts about the Federal Reserve, and so on and so on. But at the same time, like in every region, there's a different kind of Bitcoin community, and that's like part of what makes it interesting, and it's like part of the point of traveling around and instead of just being in one, right? Um, yeah, so like I'm gonna assume I'm assuming that a lot of different spaces have that kind of dynamics to them, right?
I want to take the opportunity of you using this example in order to actually address the question of like what you use the word vibe, and I
Mm,
think what we use the word kin, which is even within the Bitcoin community actually,
mm,
but maybe the Bitcoin community is quite exceptional in the sense that oftentimes the interest in Bitcoin is also a representation of a particular cultural mindset, which therefore creates kinship. But even in the Bitcoin community, there is people that are interested in Bitcoin for very different reasons. There is like the crypto libertarian vibes. There is the crypto anarchist vibe, which are very different, and even more so in many other communities, whether it's like blockchain communities or non-blockchain communities. So I think there is this really fundamental question, and I'm raising this question because for some reason, probably because of the network state book, when we talk about those community of kinship, we always use the one example of the keto kosher nation, which is interesting in its absurdity, in my view, which means it's not because I'm keto that I will be culturally aligned with someone else that is keto just because of my food preferences, and even less so, there is no guarantee that I will have a kind of kinship around it. And so I think like, we kind of tackled it with Zuzalu, but it's like there seems to be like people that are thinking in the line of aligned community means people that are interested in the same topics and that can speak the same language, versus aligned community meaning more people that for whatever reason have a cultural affinity, have a common sense of identity, and therefore are much more likely to develop this kind of direct or indirect kinship to one another. And you give the example of like saying that the people at Zuzalu might not necessarily feel at ease at the network school and vice versa. So that's, to me, that's a very good example of like people that are obviously on paper aligned on many layers at what they care about, but the vibes is not the same, right? And so in that sense, like the tribe, which I think is more the vibe than the interest alignment, um, how do we actually build tribes? Because it's harder. It's really easy to say, hey, everyone interested in Bitcoin, come to the embassy. But it's really hard to say, hey, everyone with this particular vibe, come and let's meet. So how do we actually discover, if we cannot build them, how do we discover people that actually share those vibes so that we can understand the extent to which they are part of the same tribe?
yeah. So I think there's two things here, right? One is that like in a long-term community, the thing that like binds people together is not like shared interests. It's people's interest in each other as people, which comes as a result of shared experiences. And like that's I think the thing that like Zuzula, for example, ended up creating. I mean, it's something that I think also like definitely happens in crypto, right? Because like everyone can, they can bond over like what happens to a price chart when like SBF did his thing, or like when Mt. Gox did its thing, and like various situations on crypto Twitter, and like these situations, like these collective experiences are very emotionally meaningful for them, right? And the other part of it is like when people don't really yet know each other, and when people haven't really been like part of a community, then like what like brings them together initially. And I think okay, one of the takes that I have about like things like keto kosher is that like it claims to be about one thing, but it's always in practice about other things, right? Because the way that people work, I think, is that people are like the simplest possible model you can make of a person is like basically something like like the axioms of mathematics, where you try to be like have a very strong attachments to a very small number of ideas, and then like sort of develop everything from there. But the way that humans tends to work is like we have weaker attachments to a much larger set of ideas, right? And if you see like in practice, if people come together and meet under the banner of keto kosher, then like they probably align more than average on like 100 other smaller things, right? With that, like possibly they were not even consciously aware of, right? It's similar, I think, to how like on the other side, if like you go to these like let's say hipster restaurants, right? Like the kinds of places that like sell avocado toast, and like the kinds of beach towns where like people come and like they eat that kind of food and then do yoga and like do water sports and so on, right? Then like you can probably predict things about those people's like political opinions about various topics, about those people's approach to life, about like how much they value money versus how much they value enjoyment, about those people's like level of connection to their family, about those people's religion, right? Like you like these things are always more correlated than you think, and they're correlated in ways that you can't really like always express in words easily, right? And so like I think this is why it's often easier to identify these kinds of clusters like when they already exist than it is to create them, right? Because like if you try to create keto kosher without any understanding of the existing keto community, then it's very possible that you're gonna like end up with people who wants to eat the same kind of food, but then on every other axis, they're just in a totally different universe from you, right? It's, I mean, I feel like it's something that like I've had to deal with a few times, because there were these internet communities that like I really vibed with, and then when I came to like meet them in person, I realized that there's all these like 10 other different axes on which they're just totally different people.
Mm.
And like I think part of what happened there is that like a lot of these communities, they have like some in-person components, right? But then like growing up, like in Canada and not really doing in-person things, I would always be like more disconnected from that side, right? So like that exists too. So like basically, yeah. So I would like if keto kosher works, I think it would work because of reasons that like were not written down on paper anywhere.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So within the network nation, we have this important distinction that we're trying to bring forward, which is um, what is the what is the purpose of those communities that could become network nation, um, and uh, and we always like distinguish between the internal purpose, which is literally just we want to build community with people that we feel alignment at the kinship level. And that's the goal. The goal is like the self-recursive thing of like we want to make sure that this community is prospering and that we are creating better trust and rituals and stuff like that. And then the other one is more like the external purpose, which is that community also has potentially a political agenda, which obviously also go and serve back the interest of ensuring the prosperity of the nation. But there is this distinction between internal and external purpose, which in some way goes one hand in hand. And so when we like, I feel like when we define those different flavors of how do we identify the boundaries of a community, there is the mission-driven one, which is like a community that is gathering around a particular telos, around a particular mission or goal. And then we have the outer uh, definition, which is more the community that are gathering because they have kinship, because they have a sense of belonging, etc., because they are building a common identity. And so in some ways, like the Telos one is very easy to articulate, and so it's easy to gather around. The kinship one is almost impossible to articulate, so you just need to discover it. But they're also intertwined. There is always a connection between them, and in some way they are feeding into each other. And so in your perspective and also in your experience with Zuzalu and many other community, to which extent can you see that the kinship element plays a role, uh, more so or less so or just as much as the telos? And maybe like an important question is also, do you feel that because the telos is something that can be more easily articulated, does that does it have an consequence that the telos is always brought forward at the detriment of the kin, of the kinship?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's always a trade-off between the two, right? And the other thing is that if you try to think of the question, like what is the type of telos-oriented community that is like the most prominent and advanced in the world right now, the answer is just a corporation, right? And corporations are a type of community that like have been optimized for hundreds of years around
Which is
like
really not optimized for kinship.
exactly. It's optimized around the telos, and a lot of the time, like the explicit wisdom in like corporate land says things like, we're a sports team, not a family, right? I think that was like one of the Netflix people's slogans, and that's something that like sometimes can like deliver outcomes, but at the same time, it like totally does not satisfy all of these other human needs. And like if you're trying to build something that's not a corporation, that and like you're like there's always some balance between these two things, right? And like basically, yeah, if like on the other side, if if you don't have a telos at all, then like if you set that slider all the way down to zero, then like I actually think that's unhealthy in its own way, right? Basically, yeah,
That's
because
the
it's
family.
yeah, like I mean, it is basically yeah a family, right? And that's like something that people have already, and like it fails to like speak to a large portion of human motivation, right?
And that's what makes and it's also what some of the network communities which exist at the moment are facing as a problem. They're realizing, I think, when we speak to Timur or when we speak to John Hillis from Kevin, like that vibes in and of themselves are not enough to sustain a long-lasting community. Because vibes is like more of a substrate, I would say, to kind of like because also the internal purpose needs to generate value. And value is based in the end of the day in like real material needs and some idealistic needs of like self-expression and so on. So just vibing the long term is probably not like the best recipe for building actually like an impactful community.
Yeah, yeah, and the telos as a shelling point, right? That's the other thing, and I think that we've talked about, right? That just talking about some goals, like it does attract people who share about those goals, and because they've come to like hear about those goals from the same time from the same internet, then chances are they're like people are similar in that in other ways. Um, yeah, so I would say yeah. the thing that we want is like definitely, yeah, some mixture of both of those things. Um, and yeah, because if you don't have that mixture, then like I do expect that like you're going to lose people.
And then I think there is the space component, which is, for instance, like we've got been to Prospera. Prospera, I will say, is logos Telos first. It's like pretty goal oriented towards, let's actually create a space in which we can do some things that we cannot do in other countries because of regulations, but at the same time, because it's a permanent place, there is also culture that emerge out of that, right? So at least, like, I've only been like a few weeks there, but maybe you've been more. But like, did you feel that Prospera has um also a commonality of culture and therefore a kinship that emerge amongst the participants, or is it mostly and exclusively goal oriented towards, like, let's make business with those new startups?
I think it's like starting to grow aspects of of the culture, right? Like I think for a long time it was definitely exclusively focusing on like let's set up the legal environment, let's like set up some and basic infrastructure. And you basically started having people who were like basing things inside of Prospera, but not really interacting with each other much, right? Like I mean, there even are some biotech businesses that are, like registered in Prospera, but then like they're actually based on a different part of the Roatan Island. So like actually still pretty close, but about like 5 or 10 kilometers away. It feels like it's a newer thing that it's like it, they're trying to be an actual community, right? And I mean, I've like I talked to like Nicholas and Ansinger and and like Lewis and Lonis and the other people there, and like some of them even mentioned that like Zuzalu helped uh, like inspire them about the importance of that side of things. And so they've started, like bringing people in by hosting some events, and like they started having more of a of a population, and like those things are just hard to do when you don't have any infrastructure, right? Like the other thing is the physical place there, right? They have an apartment building, and then they also have a sort of golf course style venue, and these things can hold like 100 to 200 people. Like one restaurant whose like options for food are pretty limited, right? And like people are not going to come for long if that's the level of infrastructure that you have. Although actually, like I actually think you guys would be like better at bringing people to Prospera than the Prospera people. Ironically enough, like there's a there's definitely a subset of people who are good at like bringing in the kinds of people who are just like willing to participate in some exciting and new thing, even if the quality and infrastructure is not great, and like you just collectively work together and figure it out, right? And like that's it's like the kinds of people where if there's no restaurants, like they're gonna understand that you just have to self-organize, and like collectively cooking a dinner with 30 people, and yeah, like that's not a thing that's exists there, right? Like that's the kind of thing that like someone like a Nirtaki would be, like was be able to figure out how to do, right? Like those kinds of like the more sort of collectivist cooperatives. I think the mood in Prospera is like more on the side of like people coming in and like having sort of the same kinds of lives that they would have otherwise, and not kind of adjusting too much. But I think compared to what it was before, like it's it's definitely shifted quite a bit, and like I think it's had to.
They also have this fantastic beach, which never is used because it's very bad for the longevity to be under the sun. but they have picked this beautiful location that the only people that are on the beach are the people that don't care about longevity.
Yes.
So maybe to tie
Yeah.
it back to the larger argument of this conversation, I think in the first part we kind of discussed like the emergence of these network communities and the aspirations to, achieve political and cultural kind of like goals. And that there are certain limitations which we kind of flagged of this. And at the same time, we see the emergence now of these new regulatory zones, right? And Prospera is kind of like the intersection of these kind of two movements in many ways, one of the many examples that are currently emerging. Because around the world, we see, as you also outlined in your article with Vitalik, that there are states who are tinkering with small extra regulatory zones because they're realizing that the world is changing at a fast rate, and often the rule making is kind of lagging behind. Kind of governance is outpaced by the speed of change in the world. So there is an increasing willingness to kind of create sandboxes in different governments and different nation states in order to tinker and experiment with new regimes of governance. And can you maybe help us to better understand like how these two current trends, like this network community building and this new emergence of these zones, is kind of intersecting, and what's the potential there?
Yeah, so I think there's been like two different, I mean, or potentially even three different strands of like thinking about these new zones, right? So there's a bunch of people who really came at it from the libertarian side and basically saying like, look, there's all of these oppressive regulations that we want to get away from, and like we wants to create a territory where people can be free to whether like work on technology or to like do have like businesses that would otherwise not be allowed, or even to say things that would otherwise be censored. And a lot like at the beginning, it had like they were really going for pure full sovereignty, right? Like seasteading in international waters, and then things like sea lands and things like Liberland. Um, and over time, I think a lot of people from that community have sort of moderated, and like they've shifted toward this like more cooperative and like more issue specific kind of approach of like both working with governments and also like having specific ideas in mind of like these are the types of things that we like wants to have autonomy in order to support, right? And so, like I would call them, like Mark Lauder and the Charter Cities Institute as being like one of those types of people. Autry Friedman is probably also one, right? So that's one community. Another group is people who have like looked at it from the government perspective, and like a lot of them are inspired by Shenzhen, right? Because like what they did in Shenzhen is basically they established a separate zone in China, which was it was not like obviously not as autonomous as Hong Kong was. I mean, Hong Kong was not even part of China until '97, right? But at the same time, like it had very different rules. It even did have like somewhat of an internal border. It's and people like the goal was to attract people to come and like basically have sort of more open economic policies, and like build things from scratch, like basically build a new city from a fishing village. And it's been super successful, and if you go there, it's like a really impressive city, right? And so a lot of people like really focus on that kind of example, and basically ask like from a government's perspective, how do you reform and modernize the country in a way that still minimizes risk and that minimizes like political constraints, right? And so the solution basically is, well, if you wants to change some things, don't change them across the entire country. Create this kind of separate sandbox zone that has some level of buffer, so it doesn't like affects the whole country. And then you do some things differently there, right? And I mean, like lots of countries have this, right? And like these are countries where they're totally not, like vibes aligned with the like crypto or libertarians or network spaces, states or network nations or any of this. Like it's much more of a like industrialish thing, right? And so, you have like the Dubai International Financial Center. China has like a huge number of free trade zones with like various different types of free trade. Recently, I think they're announcing that they're turning Hainan into like a much more comprehensive sort of semi-free zone in a lot of ways. And then I think the Charter Cities Institute really kind of emerged to sort of bridge the libertarian perspective and that kind of perspective, which I call sort of developmentalist, and like figure out like what is something that like clearly provides value for countries. Um, so yeah, so and then, in Bhutan, the GMC Gellifu Mindfulness City is like also like I view it as being one of these projects that's sort of in the middle between being developmentalist and being sort of idealistic in its own way, right? That it's it's trying to like essentially create a Hong Kong for Bhutan, but at the same time in ways that are kind of unique to both traditional Bhutan culture and to the like the kinds of ideas that's like the like people in Bhutan's governments are interested in. And so like all of these things are like proceeding in their own way, and it feels like generally, yeah, the world of like law and regulation is sort of moving away from very large scale uniformity. And it's moving toward much more of this kind of like local, like 2 level, 3 level structure, and like having different zones, having different jurisdictions, having like nations inside of a nation, and all of these things. And then yeah, I see the intersection of this with tribes as being something that's like I think it happens a little because there's like thematic alignments between these two areas, right? But the reason why I'm like bullish on that combination is it's like somewhat more of a theoretical reason, which is basically that, if you're China, like you can do a Hong Kong, right? Or you can do a Shenzhen. If you're Saudi Arabia, then like you can like build, 2 kilometer tall towers and Neom and so on, because they just have such a huge amount of money with oil. Though, I mean, there's obviously lots of challenges in the things that they're trying to do, right? Like if you have a massive amount of capital on that scale, then like you have a chance of creating these like new nodes that are really at the center of global network effects. But if you're anyone else, then you don't, right? Like Bhutan is not going to create a literal generic financial hub that's able to compete with Hong Kong, right? Even Honduras is not like even if Honduras is like had full support from the government and the people and Prospera, like even then, like they would have an uphill battle becoming a mainstream biotech hub that could compete with America, right? Like playing that network effect is an uphill battle. And so if you can't succeed at generic network effects, like I think you should try to succeed at specific network effects, right? You should try to succeed within a particular niche. And one of the points I made is that if you look at like examples in the real world of niche specific cities, then like the one example I gave is like ski towns and surf towns, like they're 1,000 to 5,000 people, and they're great places to live, and people live in them. University towns, often 30,000 to 150,000 people, great places to live, people live in them. Longyearbyen, the northernmost town in the world, 2,600 people, right? And so if you care about a niche, then like you can survive just fine even for a few thousand people. But then if you want to organize a niche, then like basically you have to be not generic, right? And so I think like this is it, like you basically have to have some kind of community building strategy that is not just, like raw scale. And like that's the thing that like I think this other movement can help in.
And so in your blog post, you discuss about the archipelago, which personally I really enjoy, because I think it's very aligned with our we call this like the translocal communities, but I think it's pretty similar, which is different places around the world that somehow can interconnect. The way you present it is specifically about like having those zones, which might be or might not be, I guess, autonomous or autonomous regulatory zone or whatnot. It can also be just a place that is in the standard jurisdiction, which become those kind of host for the tribes. Um, and I'm curious about like why why do you specifically describe the archipelago as not being integrated, right? As in this this horizontal space in which you have different zones and then the tribe plugging in and out on those zones, as opposed to an archipelago being specifically zone integrated with the tribe that also potentially interconnect with one another.
You say the archipelago being like integrated. Oh, I see. Like why, yeah, like why I see tribes and zones as being like separate things instead of the two eventually merging.
Yeah, why is the zone? I like the idea that the zone is the platform and then different tribes can plug in and out, but I also can see another vision that is hosting together the tribe that can be also decentralized between multiple zones, but that the zone and the tribe are actually attached.
Yeah, I mean, I do see both being possible, right? I mean, like I think the sort of prototype example probably is 4Cs, right? Where I mean, it's like 4Cs doesn't have any kind of autonomy, but it's like a physical location and it hosts a lot of pop-ups, but then at the same time, like it's not a generic space, right? And it's like a space that is attached to some particular cultures and some particular ideas. I think like the high level reason why, yeah, I was thinking about zones as platforms is basically because like the kinds of skills that it takes to make a zone is like it's really hard, right? Like you need capital, you need to understand governance, you need to understand constitutional law, you need to understand like what attracts business, you need to understand like international diplomacy, negotiation. You need to be able to like go to the kinds of companies that are building airports and like get them to come and build your airport. It's it's a lot of things that like none of the three of us are like good at doing at all, right? And
Mhm.
and so generally, yeah, when you have like these different parts of a stack that just require different specialties to the point where they require totally different personalities, then like having some kind of like separation and collaboration between those two is something that just naturally makes a lot of sense. I think, like to the extent that they, yeah, like that they would merge more, I would expect, like one example to pull on that we could talk about might be like GMC, right? Because like, I think GMC is interesting because they, on the one hand, they wants to create this autonomous zone to try to attract both like international talent and also even for to attract Bhutanese people who are otherwise like leaving the country for economic opportunities in Australia to be able to come back and like do things inside of Bhutan. But also like, they do not want to make GMC into a generic Hong Kong, right? They yeah, or Dubai or something like that, right? They yeah, like they want to create something that has some cultural aspects to it, and I mean, even right now, right? Like their government is like it's engaging with like people like us, like what in the Ethereum Foundation, it's engaging with these different groups, and so I could see, like places like that as like specializing in particular kinds of tribes. I could also see there being like zones that are like homes of big tribes, but then at the same time they have embassies in other places, right? Like you could totally imagine, like for in the future, if like GMC is a big community that has that has a culture and that has people there that know each other and that has like 50,000 people like this. That there are going to be there's going to be such a thing as a GMC here in New York, right? And at that point, then it makes sense for like maybe GMC to have its own space in New York that like people go to, right? Like that's like I could see that happening. I see that making a lot of sense.
I think like another interesting angle to approach this question for potential collaboration between zones, which are usually embedded in nation states and these tribes, is to see how the supply of ideas in the tribes, which are often like a group of people who are very future oriented, right? They're tinkering with new governance tech and so on, can match actually the real world demands and the needs of these jurisdictions. Because I think there's sometimes in these conversations, it seems a little almost abstract to me, because I feel to a certain extent it needs to be tied back with the actual needs of the citizens in the spaces where these tribes trying to integrate in. So I think like one question for me would be like, how can tribes like, for instance, Ash City, which is like specifically stating that they want to be an incubator for future societies, how can they come to like a place like Bhutan and actually help them to generate maybe new governance regimes or systems or innovations that actually in the local area help to generate public value?
I think, yeah, for zones, right? Like for them to work, a central goal of them has to be generating public value, right? And like GMC is definitely designed around this question of basically how do we level up Bhutan in a way that preserves the continuity of the people and the culture. And like those two things are like basically just explicitly, the goal of the whole project. And like for these zones to make sense at all, for them to be sustainable, for them to maintain their status in a country, and to like even survive situations where people come in and use the autonomy to, like do things that eventually inevitably generate crazy media articles. Like, they have to like provide value that to people that's like not even just zero, that's pretty substantial, right?
But I think it's not always like a pre-given configuration. If we look at a Prospera, with all respect, but there is, I think, a sort of a mismatch between what is being generated in terms of value in that extra regulatory zone and the needs of the local community, for instance, right? Like it's mainly giving space for people to tinker with health tech and attracts global investment and so on. So
Yep.
this is something which needs intentional design. I think that's just all I
It
But
does.
what I think is the difference
Yeah.
because GMC is actually by Bhutan, is
Right.
created by the government as opposed
Mhm.
to created by an external group that has probably more like profit-oriented interest than the nation state.
Yeah, and I think like was Prosper. I expect its position like I think it's obvious to them, right? That to be able to survive, like they have to uh turn what they have into a win-win for like enough people in the country that they have supporters. So like I would expect even projects that are initiated externally, like they're going to have to like and end up coming to that kind of realization, right? Like there's just like the idea that you just go in and sign a contract and like you get 50 years of autonomy and then you have to care at all, I think is just like the reason why it's unrealistic is that there's always, you know, things that were not that are not specified in the contract, right? And there's always more opportunities for like positive collaboration and between the two the two sides, right? And like to me like the most natural positive thing that you can provide is basically give local people an opportunity to stay in the country while participating in frontier science and technology, right? And like basically, can we make biotech and AI and crypto and all of these things something that's like everyone's part of instead of being something like you have to be in New York or SF or wherever to be part of them. And actually, yeah, like if you actually can achieve that, then like you win a lot of local friends, right? And of course, if you can't, then like I mean, potentially, if you're like somewhere off in a corner, like 200 kilometers away, and people kind of forget about you, then like potentially you can survive, right? And like, you know, I can. like I guess that's like, the Liberland kind of strategy, which is sort of more on the side of like, okay, we're far away and we're just doing our own thing.
There's
But
also no locals in Liberland, so there is no risk.
indeed, exactly. There's no, but at the same time, there are locals who are 5 kilometers away from Liberland, right? And like, if you can turn Liberland into something where like locals from 5 kilometers away are like coming in and like they're able to interact, interact with people working on like biotech and like learn things, yeah, then like you get more friends, right? And like I think stability is never like is never as guaranteed as as it is on like words written on paper. And so yeah, it's like like basically I think there's a limit to the extents to which you can pursue the strategy of like, uh we're just off in uh in the corner and we're not touching you, so you can't and so we expect you not to touch us. Like I expect all of these things to be more stable if they find ways to engage more and provide provide more of that positive value. And then like in Prospera, the thing that we've seen so far is like there are Hondurans that are on the team. There are people locally who are starting to or who already have been like building businesses. So some of that is like exists. It feels like more than it was before.
One last question because we're running out of time. Going back to the archipelago, so I think the concept of the disentangling the zones and the tribes is great, and it also align with many of the framework that we have within the network nation, where like the nation states remains as the landlord, and then the network nation can plug in and out or create partnership in different ways. One thing that actually was surprising to me when reading your post is that you discuss a lot about like the spaces with the zones and the population with the tribes, but you actually don't discuss more much the question, especially in the context of the archipelago. You don't discuss much the question of like the institutional governance structure, and in particular because if the tribes is connected to the zone, then the zone is the governance of the tribe. But if you have tribes that are actually in the ether and sometimes instantiating themselves into different zones, then the tribe still needs its own governance structure, its own institutional framework. And I'm very curious because, of course, as the founder of Ethereum and Web3 advocate, how come you don't discuss that? And also, do you feel that in order for those, because like existing nation that exist in a nation states, they have the infrastructure of the states. The population of the zone, they have the infrastructure of the zone, etc. But those tribes or those network nations that live not in a particular territorially I mean, the humans live in a territorial area, but the network nation as such does not have geographical boundaries. So, how do they actually govern themselves? And is blockchain or decentralized technology and whatnot fundamental and require infrastructure in order to create governance structures that are not bound within a particular server, which is controlled by a particular sovereign, whether it's a corporate sovereign or a political sovereign. So yeah, what's your take in particular because you promote this archipelago vision? Like, where is the governance infrastructure in that framework?
Yeah. So one of the things that we discovered after Zozolo is like there's definitely strong pressure for the governance like thinking to sort of fall away, especially in the context of some of these pop-ups, right? Because at the beginning we were thinking like, okay, we did so solo and then after it like we should figure out some kind of proper DAO, but then the thing that I think people sort of quietly realized is like when you just have pop-ups, then the governance that like works surprisingly well is just forking, right? Like basically, yeah, you make a pop up and then every pop up is organized by a small founding team. and it's like basically benevolent short-term dictator. And then if they don't do a good job, then like basically someone else can come and like say, well, I'm doing my own, and then people will migrate over, right? And we even saw like Vitalia like split in half, and like there were two forks of that, right? And I generally think that like forking as governance is something that's often underrated because there's like this instinct to formalize. But then often, formalizing has its costs. Like it makes legible the illegible, and it ends up like eliding a lot of things. And like forking as governance is sort of this traditional open source like approach that always sort of works unreasonably effectively in a lot of situations. But then the challenge is that eventually, like that is going to run up to its limits, right? Because if you build something permanent, then like you can't fork it. I mean, it's possible even that like you can fork a tribe, but you can't fork a zone, you can't fork a permanent location, and that's like I hope that we come back to like figuring out governance more thoroughly, right? And I think this is also connected to this bigger issue that we see in crypto, right? It's like there's this mood in 2025
Yeah.
that sort of house are dead, governance is dead. Let's just go back
Mhm.
to cookies. And I think you have to sort of engage with that and like understands the reasons why people have been disillusioned with the sort of initial decade of DAOs.
Yeah.
And but then we have to come back and realize like, wait, actually, corporations and financialized governance also have a problem, and we need to figure out the better thing.
Yeah, just like a very last thought on this, or a question, but because you're inverting this relationship in a way yourself, like you could say we see that crypto is in this kind of identity crisis to some extent, right? The original Web3 promise is not fully, I think, I've rolled out at this point, and there's all these institutional players like BlackRock coming in, and like we have a lot of DAO governance structures without really users and so on. So the question is really, is there a need for new political projects or a plurality of political projects that can reinvigorate the old promise and kind of aspiration of the Web3 scene? Because in a way, decentralization is a worthy goal, but it seems to me at least it's a means to an end, right? Like a decentralized society in itself is not a political value, at least for me personally. So I wonder how like the tribes and like constructs like the network nations and network societies and so on can help reinvigorate also the crypto scene and maybe provide some sort of a new north star for parts of this community.
Yeah, there's definitely like a need, I think, to reinvigorate, governance and DAOs and all of these things on like new principles. And like, if I had to guess what some of those principles are, I mean, one of them is like privacy, right? Like a lot of governance mechanisms break because all of your votes are private. Another one I think is like we as the crypto space should be willing to be less dependent on blockchains everywhere. I do think for a long time we had a kind of hammer and nail mentality where we basically said like, hey, the thing that we have is a blockchain, and therefore we should try to stick everything onto it. And the reality is like blockchains are one tool. Sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't make sense. And like now, I mean, things like ZK have become more mature. Like even things like CRDTs have become more mature. Like it feels like there's more willingness to work with things that are not blockchains, and that are also not tokens more, and I think that's healthy. And then the other thing is like you also need a new season of users, right? Like the like getting optimism to change how it works is hard because there's an existing set of stakeholders that are invested in how optimism works today, right? And then also, if you design a new governance for optimism, then like your new governance is going to at the same time create winners, create losers, and it creates big incentives for people to like push really hard to try to get themselves into the winning position. And so, existing big things are possibly not even the best environment for figuring out like newer forms of governance or DAOs. And so I think like I'm more optimistic about newer projects, right? And I think that includes like newer crypto projects, and it includes in like newer pop-ups uh or tribes or permanent hubs.
Okay, thank you, Vitalik. As a closing thought, can you give hopeful, hopefully
Hmm.
positive, take on like for us and for many people around us that are trying to promote and build this
Hmm.
concept of network nations?
Hmm.
Um, what do you think is the thing that what is the low hanging fruit that we should be focusing on the most?
It's a good question. Like I think because I think the low hanging fruit depends a lot on what specific thing that you're building. Like, because I think like the wrong way to approach this is probably I wants to make a nation, and therefore let me figure out the part of the things that a nation needs. Right. Like the right way to approach this is going to be more. I have an existing community, and this existing community has particular needs, and like let's figure out a nation as a way of addressing those needs.
And
Uh,
connecting the existing communities. Yeah.
connecting the existing communities and empowering existing communities to like uh, do things that they collectively care about. Yeah, like I would basically start with the question of like what are your community's needs in terms of both being connected to each other and in terms of like things that that community wants to do or things that that community wants to see in the world, and then like from there the step one and step two of low hanging fruit should come out.
And do you have within your own network or not directly connected, like ideas of potential pilot communities that are kind of like navigating around in the space of proto-network nationhood and that could somehow benefit from this framework?
Question. Like, I mean, I feel like, the kind of extended Ethereum community has a lot of aspects of like proto network nationness to it as well, right? And like, I think one of the things that's happening over the last couple of years, right, is that like it's starting to become more clear like the kinds of things that like that group of people is interested in that go beyond the Ethereum, the blockchain. And then at the same time, on the flip side, that there are a lot of people, using the Ethereum, the blockchain, that are not connected to like that other side of things at all, right? And yeah, like there's a lot of these fascinating different corners of the Ethereum world, and I think there's a lot of commonalities in terms of like caring about decentralized and self-sovereign technology. In terms of caring about freedom, in terms of caring about like things like like public goods and like solving these big collective problems. Um, and of course, it's like a group of people that have been with each other in many cases for 5 to 10 years. And so I feel like, I mean, I don't think he wants to like try to organize all of that into one big super tribe, but I feel like, sprouting um, tribes from that is the right thing to do.
Okay, cool. Vitaly, that was great. That was fun.
Mm.
Thanks a lot. And yeah, we'll
Yeah, thank you.
keep in
Mm,
touch.
mhm,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
mm.
you.
Thank you.